welcome to Dave Examines Movies and TV. Today, I examine one of the most classic cartoon Disney films, Peter Pan. Will this 64-year-old film stand the test of time, or would a blind audience viewing for the first time leave unimpressed after viewing The Boy That Never Grew Up? Hey, I'm Dave, and I created DaveExaminesMovies.com. I've been reviewing movies for over 10 years, and I believe I've discovered the ultimate method for reviewing film. I've always used a 1 out of 100 star rating, but somehow that was still too biased and inaccurate for my taste. I wanted something so unquestionable that even if you hated something that I loved, you could appreciate my logic, and I found it. I call it Interpreting the Stars, which splits a movie into 10 categories, 5 solid categories that fit any film, and specialty categories created specifically for the movie at hand. The first 5 categories are people, writing, behind the scenes, narrative arc, and overall entertainment. Each of these categories will have 5 subcategories of their own that ultimately define the star rating of the film. You will no longer have to ask why a film's rated 76% versus 77. You will now know what each and every star represents. This is Dave Examines Movies and TV. Well, how's it going, everybody? Welcome and happy Monday for those of you that are listening to this as I release it. As I said last week, I will not be reviewing this live because I am, while you're listening to this, if you are listening to this as it releases, I am currently on my way to a job interview, so wish me luck. But for those of you that don't care and are just listening to it as a podcast and for what it is, thanks for listening. And this is Kids Week, and all week this week I will be talking about kids movies, pretty much from old to new, if you actually think about it this way. The first one that I'll be reviewing is Peter Pan, which came out in 1953. And now I remember watching this as a kid, but I don't entirely remember loving it. At most, I might think I remember wanting to fly as Peter Pan, because that was one of the first times you saw a human fly other than maybe Superman or something like that. So Peter Pan is definitely a classic, but the real question remains is if a blind audience, and what I mean by that is an audience that sees this for the first time in 2017 as a child, will the expectations of today get in the way of experiencing Peter Pan? Will you be a little bit disappointed when you first watch it? Now, I strive to answer that as best as I can, but I guess it does depend on how you are as a movie viewer, because a lot of people still view this as one of the best Disney movies to ever have been released, just because it's classic, and I don't think that's a fair assumption to make. I can appreciate it for how old it is and how innovative it was when it first was released, but I try to review, for the most part, as a blind audience viewing it for the first time, and when you do that, you see things a little bit differently, and that's important to take part in, because there are such things as blind audiences that see these movies for the first time ever. So you can't just say they're wrong when they say they didn't like it just because it's a classic movie. They cannot like it and appreciate it for what it used to be at the same time, which is often my experience with these things. So, welcome to Kids Week. Let's get started with the People Score. The People Score goes into 5 subcategories here. Well, actually, let me tell you what the movie is about and what it's rated according to IMDb, because that's what I like to do first. I like to know myself, actually. Peter Pan, 1953. Yes. I can fly! Is this the right one? It has to be the right one. Walt Disney, yep. So, Walt Disney on Peter Pan's IMDb, it's not even rated anything. It's rated approved before they actually had real ratings. but it's rated 7.3 or 73% if you will. It says Wendy and her brothers are whisked away to the magical world of Neverland with the hero of their stories, Peter Pan. Essentially, that's really what it's about. Wendy has been telling her stories to her brothers about this magical boy named Peter Pan who never grows up, and that she has caught his shadow and that he will be back for it. And of course he is back for it. And when he meets her, she loves him. She's like obsessed with telling his stories, so he decides to give her a little bit of fairy dust so she can join him to his Neverland. We all know the story of Peter Pan, but that's just, making sure you definitely understand. Now, the People score goes into 5 subcategories of acting, characters, casting, importance, and chemistry. As far as this is concerned, the acting is terrible. I mean, people who are fancy the classic of it, how classic it is, and they don't really care. But here's the thing. When you're listening to 1953 children speaking, it just reminded me so much of, say, Julie Andrews when she's 60 years old talking. It's just so polite and precise and, ooh, how lovely. Like, this is not how kids talk. Kids who are watching this for the first time just will not, I repeat myself, will not connect with these kids. They won't. They might connect with these kids as they are their grandparents or something, because that's how they're talking. So I'm sorry to say, but the acting is 0 out of 2 stars. It's just awful if you're comparing it to today's day and age with acting. 0 out of 2 stars. Next up is the characters. How well do the characters remain memorable and everything? I'm going to say this is 2 out of 2 stars. That's pretty easy enough, right? I mean, you have Peter Pan, you have Wendy, you have her brothers, you have Captain Cook and Smee and all the Lost Boys, and they are all relatively memorable characters, even though her brothers kind of blend into one. They're all relatively memorable enough to say that the characters are 2 out of 2 stars there. I have no qualms about saying that's perfect. 2 out of 2 stars. Next up is casting. How did the people do their job in the casting here? Well, the real answer is it's not 2. And the reason why is because it's voice actors. Do I think anybody else could do the job better? I actually do think that's possible, but I couldn't tell you who specifically. Like I said, the acting was atrocious, but it's 1953, and I can't entirely say with good reason that anybody else could do better, because that's just how people in 1953 spoke. So I have to say that I do appreciate that and acknowledge that, but at the same time, I can't help but say that the casting could be better. So for that, I'll just be saying that the casting is 1 out of 2 stars, because there's a possibility that it could be better. There's also a possibility that it couldn't be, but I'm not going to get into that. Technically speaking, if I were working in Disney, I would throw it out to people that maybe we could redub this movie with new voices that actually sound like they're relatable characters. But of course, I would be shot down for that because, woo, that's terrible. That's messing with something. No, I don't care. I don't care. Yeah, it might be messing with something, but if it makes it better, it makes it better. So, shut up! Next up is the importance. Does every character have an importance? Do they add to the plot, and is there a reason for them being there? I fought myself on this one as well, but I think for the most part, it is 2 out of 2 stars. Peter Pan has a reason to be there. He is Peter Pan, but so does Wendy. Wendy brings out the best in him and the most adventurous side of him. The Lost Boys have a reason to be there with the brothers, although very slight, because it has to do with that Indian group that literally is there for no reason. Like, as they said, the Lost Boys tie up the Indians and let them go. The Indians tie them up and let them go. And that's like their entire reason of being. I mean, I'll say it adds to the story, but it really doesn't. It's like one of those side stories that's kind of stupid, which brought me almost down to 1 out of 2 stars. But then again, we have to take into consideration there is the pirates and their importance in the film. So I will say 2 out of 2 stars there, although that's being nice, okay? Being nice. Chemistry. You know, I don't think anybody really has chemistry in this film. It is what it is. It's just cartoon characters talking to each other. If anything, the most chemistry you're going to find is Tinkerbell with Peter Pan being jealous and all flirty because she's got a big bottom. Seriously, watch it. She's obsessed with how big her bottom is and wants Peter Pan, like, bad. So as far as that's concerned, the chemistry, it really is nothing. I'm going to have to say 0 out of 2 stars, bringing the People's score as a total to 5 out of 10 possible stars, which is not a good start. All right, next up is the writing score. Writing score has 5 subcategories as usual, and that is the dialogue, the balance, the story, the originality, and how interesting it is. First up is dialogue. You know, I think it would have been better in the dialogue if they had used the line that you hear in Hook all the time, which I think is part of the actual book, and that is, "Boy, why are you crying?" I think that's kind of a memorable line. They don't use it in this, which is dumb. And then when they're talking about, "I shall give you a kiss," I liked in Hook where the kiss was the thimble. And in this movie, when they're talking about the kiss, you see Tinkerbell in the shelf, which actually had a thimble in it. But, I mean, I don't know. It was just a kiss, I guess. There's all these lines in Hook specifically that are important to the plot, and they just, it's boring in the cartoon. It's just matter-of-factly in the cartoon, so I can't help but say 1 out of 2 stars for that. At most, "We can fly, we can fly, we can fly" is as deep as it gets with dialogue. 1 out of 2 stars. Next is how balanced it is. Now, you'd think a cartoon from 1953 would be absolutely balanced and not convoluted. But that whole side story with the Indians and the Lost Boys was so ridiculously unimportant and stupid that it's hard to ignore. So as far as that goes, I think that was entirely unnecessary. I will have to say the balance is 1 out of 2 stars as well. Next up, how about the story? Well, the story is not only about enjoying your youth while you have it. It's also about imagination and daydreaming and how that's important pretty much to Disney's standards. Like, that's important for Disney to live in your daydream and remember what it is to be youthful, even into your old age. I think that's important. I think that's what Disney's trying to tell us. And I will say 2 out of 2 stars for that. Although most people probably won't really get that. The next one is originality. How original is it? Well, it's Peter Pan. It's original, right? I said 1 out of 2 stars for this. And that's mostly because if you are watching this for the first time, it won't feel original. It'll feel like you've seen it before. And maybe you have through book form, maybe you have through Hook form, or, there's other Peter Pan movies, and I do prefer other Peter Pan movies over this. And because of that, after seeing this for the first time in ages, it felt like the first time for me. I will have to say it didn't feel original, and I know that's stupid, and I know that's saying I can appreciate that it is original for what it is, but it doesn't feel like it. 1 out of 2 stars. How interesting is it? Well, it's interesting. Um, it is Peter Pan. You have a flying boy, and you have a lot of adventure going on. But watching it wasn't super interesting for me. And I'll get into this a little bit later, but I did have my young child, my almost 2-year-old, watching it as well, and he loves cartoons, and he loves physical humor and all this stuff, and I will get into a little bit more there, but let's just say he wasn't very much interested in it. So for this, I will say parts of it were, but most of it wasn't. 1 out of 2 stars. That brings the writing score as a whole up to 6 out of possible 10 stars. We're not very good. It's not very good looking here, guys. That brings the subtotal up to 11 out of 20 points, which is not very high. Next up is the behind-the-scenes score, which goes into the visuals, the directing, the editing, advertisement, and music. Now, this is where we have to be a little bit more conscientious about when the movie was released, okay? It was released in 1953, so let's talk about visuals. Even for today's standards, the cartoon aspect of it seemed perfect. There's nothing wrong with the cartoon aspect of it. Even for today's standards, if anything, it'd be people complaining that it's not widescreen, that it's full screen or something. But the visuals weren't bad. It was exactly how you would remember it and continue remembering it for years, for decades. And I think that had to do a lot with Disney magic and having quality animation, even from the get-go. The cartoon aspect here, very well done. I will give the visuals 2 out of 2 stars because that does impress me. The directing and the editing, I gave 1 out of 2 possible stars because I don't think the director really had much hard work to go on here. He told the animators what to do, and they did it, period. 1 out of 2 stars. Editing, likewise. When you have animation, you have more of a stricter idea of how you want things to get covered. And the editor just says okay with that, just stitches things together as he normally would. 1 out of 2 stars for both of those. As for the advertisement, it is as advertised. It is that Disney classic Peter Pan, and even more so than before, it does feel like a classic, an aged classic maybe. So I will give it 2 out of 2 stars there. It is as it's advertised. Music. This is what I was expecting to be 2 out of 2 stars because if there's anything Disney is able to do is make a really good musical. The answer to this is no. There's no music in this that is memorable. The only 2 things that I consider music, as far as music is memorable, is "You Can Fly, You Can Fly, You Can Fly," and it's not memorable because it sounds like a 50s record player's playing it, and it sounds so old-fashioned, and it's not something that anybody's going to care about anymore. It might be a little catchy to say "You can fly, you can fly, you can fly," but the entire movie is other than that. The entire movie is pirates singing God knows who knows what, the Lost Boys singing something or other, and there's all these different songs that you just don't care about because they're so forgettable. They're like just random songs here and there. And that really disappointed me. The most memorable song, I will say, is probably when the alligator is heading after Captain Hook. It has that kind of Jaws thing. And that's what you're going to memorize most from a movie. It's nothing. I will give this 1 out of 2 stars just because it had that alligator. Whatever. Maybe you can fly, whatever. I'm going to give it 1 out of 2 stars, but that's being nice, actually. Next up is the narrative arc score. Let's talk about let's talk about the behind-the-scenes score as a whole with 7 out of 10 stars, which is so far has been the best out of all of them. 11, so 7, so 18 out of 30. Next up is narrative arc score. We have introduction, inciting incident, obstacles, the climax, and the following action. Once again, this is very important. If it feels like it's missing something, it might be this here. So we have the introduction. We are introduced to Wendy and her brothers and the overall idea of what Peter Pan is. The incident is when Peter Pan shows up, regains his shadows, talks with Wendy and her brothers, and ultimately heads off to Neverland. The obstacles is when Peter Pan runs into the pirates for the first and second time, when the Lost Boys run into the Indians for that time. The obstacles are there. So far, introduction, the inciting incident, and the obstacles all get 2 out of 10 possible stars. The climax, however, is anticlimactic, and I feel like there's 2 of them. There's every now and then I'll run into a movie that feels like it has 2 endings, and the first one was better than the second one. And that goes well here. So the climax is just fine. They should have ended it where they were ahead. So 1 out of 2 stars for climax. 1 out of 2 stars for the falling action, because there barely was one. There was a little bit, but barely. So 1 out of 2 stars for falling action. That brings our narrative arc score up to 8 out of possible stars. So that's actually the highest category I think we have. Which brings us up to 26 out of 40. Next up, we're going to talk about entertainment score, the hardest score for me to actually entertain while talking about these movies. Rewatchability, fun, impulse to buy, impulse to talk, and does it suck the audience in? Okay, let's talk about that. We have rewatchability. Do you feel like you would rewatch this again? Maybe as a kid, I might, to see if I understood it better. But after seeing it recently, I definitely had the thought edging in my brain that no, I have no real desire to see it again. I was thinking this is probably the last time I'm going to see it. If Liam wants to see it again, then sure. But I might have to fight through it that time. So 0 out of 2 stars for rewatchability. Is it fun? I would say yes. There are aspects to it that feel magical and child-friendly that are fun to watch, but it's very far and few between. I think it has more to do with nostalgia than anything as far as the fun's concerned. So that's 1 out of 2 stars. Did I have an impulse to buy it? No, as I said, I don't want to rewatch it again, so 0 out of 2 stars. If anything, you'd want to buy it because you'd want to collect it as part of the Disney Classics. But I think that's about it. You don't want to buy it to watch it. Impulse to talk about it? Not really. Everybody knows the Peter Pan story by now, and there's really no need to say anything. Does it suck the audience in? Maybe if you're a child and you like flying people, but for the most part, 0 out of 10 possible stars there. That brings the entertainment score up to 1. 1 out of 10 possible stars for that. Ouch. So let's add that up again. The people score was 5. The writing score was 6. That brings you up to 11. The BTS score was 7. That brings you up to 18. Narrative arc was 8, which brings you up to 26. Entertainment was 1, which brings you up to 27. So let's talk about the specialty categories that I wrote before watching the movie. Alright, so Peter Pan, let's select that. First one is a family versus kids. Is this more of a kids-only movie or more of a family movie where both the parents and the kids can enjoy? You know, I was actually fully expecting this to be, the former, that it would just be about kids and I would have trouble watching it. But I think as far as the family is considered, there are things that are considered innuendo back then that you don't normally see these days. You see kids smoking weed somewhere in this movie. No joke. You actually see kids smoking weed with the Indians. You see innuendo when it comes to Tinkerbell putting a huge focus on the shape of her body and how she can't get out of the keyhole because her butt's so big. And there is notice to that where she puts her hands to her hips and takes her hands out, doing a mental size of how wide she is. Also, The mermaids in the film, some of them were wearing bras, some of them were not, so their hair were covering the goods or whatnot. But that is definitely something parents are going to notice more than their kids. So, funny enough, there was stuff for both all ages, actually. That interested me. That was surprising. 10 out of 10 stars for that. How aged has it been? Well, like I said before, the visuals and the cartoon element, the animation element, was surprisingly well done and still respectable for today's standards in animation and cartoons. However, the audio is pretty bad. The audio feels like it was recorded from an old, decrepit, tape or something. An old stereo that just has terrible high-pass filters and things like that, if you understand audio FX crap. High filters. It just sounded fake and sounded bad, did not sound real, and threw me out of the movie a little bit. So as far as how aged the movie has been over the last, 60-some years, I'd give it 5 out of 10 stars because the visuals weren't terrible, but the audio is. How about for kids now? This is where I'm talking about, is it Liam approved? Now, like I said before, it does have a good story about imagination and sticking to your youth and remembering who you are, even through your old age or whatnot. But is it Liam approved? How long did he sit through it? I'll have to say this much. Not long. My kid was not interested very much in this movie, which tells you a lot, because my kid is pretty innocent to seeing movies these days. So to him, it's new, but it wasn't interesting. Okay, so how does it hold up from memory? I have a note here that says yes and no. Yes, I remember it for holding up from memory, but at the same time, that's all I can say about it. I remember it. It's not nostalgic, really. It's a cartoon, and that's all I can really say about it. I'll say 5 out of 10 stars for that. Does it make you want to fly? One of the things I said as a kid, and actually I knew kids from my high school in drama class that were talking about how films have inspired them in good and bad ways, and one of them said they broke their arms believing that they could fly like Peter Pan, and that was a true story. And I could see that, it used to be inspiring to make you want to fly, but while I was watching it, it didn't. I think the more, I'm thinking back to when I wanted to fly, and it was always more with Superman, whether you're talking about the animated cartoon series or with the Christopher Reeve movies. That gave me more inspiration. It gave me more hopes. It gave me more of a desire to lift myself up and fly, either, through physical means like magic, or through not mental, but through a mindset kind of thing. Lift yourself up. Peter Pan didn't do that. It just was what it was. Maybe some kids will see it as that, maybe some won't. So for that, I'm going to say 5 out of 10 possible stars. That brings the total specialty category up to 30 possible stars out of 50, which brings our total possible stars, our total score for this movie to be 57 out of 100 possible stars. I'm not gonna give it to you plainly, but that's not much. You know what I mean? 57 is a pretty bad score. It's more than half. So I think as far as if you were rating this on Rotten Tomatoes, it would be fresh maybe because it's above 50. But for me, that's rather low, especially for a Disney movie. I love Disney movies, and I feel like giving it this low of a score is almost criticizing it and being unfair to it, because it's just a classic Disney film in the golden age of Disney, and I feel almost bad saying that, but it really comes down to each and every of the categories that I use for every movie, and I stand by this rating, and this is how it is for me nowadays. I mean, this is like 64-year-old movie. It's 64 years old. Times have changed. I mean, I'm sure in 1953, this was like an amazing movie that kids loved to death. They wore their Peter Pan costumes for Halloween, and they read the books that came out, and they were all about it. But the kids of 1953 are different than the kids of 2017. My mom wasn't even born yet. I mean, we are a different generation upon a different generation of who experienced Peter Pan. So it's classic. It deserves to be seen as such, and it deserves to be respected as such. But as a entertaining movie nowadays, it's just not what it used to be. So keep that in mind. So if you ever feel like watching the movie again, don't expect it to be to land up to your expectations of if you did love it when you were a kid. Nostalgia doesn't always work. Because sometimes you just expect nostalgia to work, and that's just not the case anymore. We've grown out of it, maybe. Okay, so anyways, that's my review for Peter Pan. Again, this was not a live broadcast. It was pre-recorded to air on Monday because I am currently in a job application interview. Wish me luck. If I actually get the job, I might have to start pre-recording all of my reviews. How terrible. Either that or maybe even move my my schedule to a different time. Anyways, we'll see how it goes when it goes. Tomorrow I will be reviewing TV's finest, or basically the best TV shows I remember as a kid. Either that means just for entertainment or for educational purposes. I'm not entirely sure how many I'm going to go through, but I think I will be going through 20 of the best, and I'll try to actually, I haven't actually rated any of these yet. I want to rate them so I can give you the best and most reasonable rating for the best of the kids' TV shows. What I won't be talking about is like Sesame Street, Barney Reading Rainbow, things of the nature that are specifically geared for, or Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, that are specifically geared for really young children, because that's going to be so temporary that when they're older, they're not going to even remember it themselves. They're not going to think back to their childhood and think, boy, my favorite was Barney, my favorite was Lamb Chops, or things like that. Those were geared more towards your younger years, and I'm going to be talking about more that are going to stick with you for the rest of your life. For better or worse, whatever. So I'll try to get through that list soon, and tomorrow. So I'll see you tomorrow. Make sure you write me in my email, david@examensmovies.com, to either give me any questions or concerns, or if you have an idea of a movie to review soon. I'll take a look into that. You can tweet me at IAMDWG on Twitter. I am on Tracked TV, as I always like to tell you. You can go on there and track what kind of movies, TV shows I've been watching. And if you're there at the right time, you can see the exact show of what I'm watching at that precise moment and know to the minute where I am. So, but you have you have to be there at the right time. Otherwise, whatever. So I'm on there. You can see me on my website, davidexaminesmovies.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on everywhere. You can subscribe to this podcast, which I highly recommend because there's more to come. There's always more to come. And you can subscribe to this podcast through pretty much any podcast server right now, because it is on iTunes, it is on Google Play Services, it is on Stitcher. It is, like, if you have a third-party podcast listener on Android, you'll find me, because that's just how it is. So I'm everywhere. Come find me. Come talk to me. I like to hear from you guys, and peace out. I'll see you tomorrow with the best of kids' TV shows. Peace out.